Yeah, we're ready to go. Does that mean we're live right now? Okay, so I should start. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وعنده مفاتح الغيب لا يعلمها إلا هو ويعلم ما في البر والبحر وما تسقط من ورقة إلا يعلمها ولا حبة في ظلمات الأرض ولا رطب ولا يابس إلا في كتاب مبين. Last time we left off, we talked about some of the aftermath of the Battle of Badr, and we talked about some of the military activities, so on and so forth. And as I said, and it just bears, I like to repeat because when you repeat, that's how you remember, is that the reason we focus in the Medina period on the battles is because this was unusual at this time, that there would be so many military activities. And when there is, constant battles or constant military activities, usually that's how a community commemorates or remembers these type of events. Now, after the Battle of Badr, including all of the minor military engagements we spoke about last time, the Quraysh now are very upset. This was a tremendous loss to them. Many of the leaders of Quraysh were killed in the Battle of Badr. We talked about that as well. It's a huge emotional, psychological defeat for them. So Abu Sufyan, who now is the default leader of Quraysh at this time, and of course before he becomes Muslim, he sells the entire caravan that he had that was trading north in the Levant. He sells the entire caravan for 50,000 dinars, which is an extreme amount of money if you calculate it in today's dollars. And he prepared an army to fight again the Prophet ﷺ. And to this effect, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed a verse in Surah Al-Anfal, verse 36, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفْرُوا يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ لِيُصُدُّوا عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. So the people that disbelieve, they spend their money so that they can prevent the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. فَسَيُنْفِقُونَهُ. They will spend this money, ثُمَّ تَكُونُ عَلَيْهِمْ حَسْرًا. But then it will be against them at the end. ثُمَّ يُغْلَبُونَ. And then they will be defeated. وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ يُحْشَرُونَ. And the people that disbelieve, they will be taken to the hellfire. So this verse is very powerful. Usually I don't mention the specific verses about the specific events, but I wanted to mention this verse because this is also a principle. This is a principle about when people spend resources on that which is good versus when people spend resources on that which is bad. A lot of times in our group think, we always think that, oh, we're so bad, oh, we're so poor, oh, we don't have anything, oh, the other, right? As if there's like one thing over there called the other, they have this and they have that. Right? But this is not the thinking of the believer, because what we're concerned with is our values. If our values are sound, the rest of Allah will take care of the rest. But if our values are not sound, then you have to spend money. You have to market things that people don't know about, that have sort of deficiencies. But when something is good in the ethical point of view, it's natural and it spreads. So just to highlight, and this story of Uhud will demonstrate that, just like the story of Badr demonstrates that in the entire Medina period. The Muslims were always outnumbered. Until the very end, they were grossly outnumbered. Limited resources. Complete limited resources. Like in the Battle of Badr, we talked about how one of the Sahaba, Ukasha, he lost his sword. He went to the Prophet, he asked for the sword. He said, where am I? There's no surplus, we have nothing. Take this and fight with it, and it became a sword, etc. So it's not about the money that's spent. It's not about the number of people. It's about the hearts of the people. وَكَمْ مِنْ فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةٍ كَثِيرَةٍ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. How many is a small group? They defeated a large group by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And even in the West, we have the story of David and Goliath. Right? And actually that verse is from the story of David and Goliath in the Quran itself. So we have this, keep that front and center. Anyway, the Quraysh, they amassed an army this time of 3,000 fighters, 200 cavalry, and they decided to take their women as well, and they marched north to Medina, and there were 15 women that were total. So I don't want people to think there were thousands of women, but the idea is that if I'm in battle and my wife is there, or my daughter is there, or my sister is there, I'm more encouraged, to fight because I see that I'm like literally protecting them. That was the idea behind them taking their women. In addition to the fact that many of these women were also poets and were also morally encouraging their troops in battle. And remember, we talked about poetry being, a lot of times we read that in the Sirah, and the best way to think about it is, these were, people that owned like newspapers today, or news channels, or media owners. If you were a poet back then, that was the equivalent. It was the vehicle of propaganda, it was the vehicle of communication, and especially when things were put in poems and rhyming form, they would be memorized by all of these people, and that's how information gets passed on, etc. Anyway, Abu Sufyan was the leader of this army, and one of his lieutenants was Khalid ibn al-Walid, who needs no introduction, but it is worth mentioning that this is a pretty serious military strategy person. So if you're up against Khalid ibn Walid, the chances are that you will lose. So again, a huge amount of army. Now, at this time, right after the Battle of Badr, the Prophet ﷺ's uncle Al-Abbas radiallahu anhu had become Muslim. And he remained in Mecca. So he's seeing all of this happen. He's seeing all of this, the caravan being sold, the army being put together, them marching north. So he quickly sends a message to the Prophet ﷺ by a speed carrier, like Prime, right? This is the Prime of the time. Prime message from Mecca to Medina, because the army is going to move slower than an individual rider. So he sends an individual rider. He gets to Medina in 3 days, which is quite fast if you calculated the distance, 400 plus kilometers, plus how many kilometers the rider would have had to travel a day. That's pretty quick to get there in 3 days. He meets the Prophet ﷺ on the 2nd of Shawwal of the 3rd year of the Hijrah. Okay, so this is right after Eid. This is right after Eid. He meets the Prophet ﷺ in the Masjid of Quba, the Mosque of Quba, and he's reading, he has a scribe or read to him ﷺ this message about this impending army that's coming north. So this means that the army is days away from Medina. Even though he got there first, the army is only days away from Medina. The person that read this message was Ubay ibn Ka'b radiallahu anhu, and then he ordered Ubay to be silent and to be quiet about what he read. Again, these are lessons for us to learn about how information, what we normally would talk about in times of war, you don't talk about. And the Prophet ﷺ here is teaching the companions, is teaching us that there is a time and there are a place for everything. Not all of the rules of Islam apply all the time, everywhere the same. They change depending on the circumstance. So the Prophet ﷺ, orders him to be silent. This is a time of war. There's an impending invasion of Medina. So the Prophet ﷺ quickly returns to Medina and starts to get everything in order. The Muslims start arming themselves immediately. Even during the prayer, they're armed, because they don't know when this is going to happen, what's going to happen. And even some of the companions took up again guarding the Prophet ﷺ's house, rotations of watchmanship, in the mosque, in the house, in front, in the back, constantly rotating, making sure that there was always somebody keeping an eye out for the Prophet's family, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Quraysh, they reach the area of an Abwa. And why is an Abwa important? Because this is where the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, Amina alayhi salam, is buried. And of course, by that I am demonstrating that we believe that the parents of the Prophet ﷺ are saved, which is an Aqidah issue. We've mentioned that before. Hind, the wife of Abu Sufyan, who was also with the army, she wanted to dig up the grave of Amina and desecrate her body. And even that was, a little too much. So Abu Sufyan and the other people, they said, that's, if you do that, you're going to start a bad trend. Then they're going to do that. So that's going over the line. We can't do that. And they prevent her from doing that. And that is why these people are protected, right? I mean, that could have happened, but it didn't. And this reminds us that these people, even after they die, are protected. I mean, how could the womb that carried the best of creation, sallallahu not be a person of virtue? Finally, the Quraysh, they arrive at Uhud. which everyone sees, after you land into Medina and drive down to go into the center of the city, you all see the mountain of Uhud. They arrive in Uhud on Friday, the 6th of Shawwal, in the 3rd year of the Hijrah. So again, days after the Prophet ﷺ has received this message of an impending invasion, they arrive. They're at the gates. The enemy is at the gates. The Prophet ﷺ had a vision. And in this vision, he saw 3 things. He saw that, or his interpretation of the 3 things that he saw is that some of his companions will be killed, a member of his house, of his family will be killed, and Medina will be protected if they stay in Medina. And of course, the Prophet ﷺ having a vision is different from us having a vision. And we've spoken about this maybe in the Seerah, but elsewhere, you've heard me talk about the importance of visions. For us, when we have a vision of something, if you have like a vision of the people that dream of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Prophet ﷺ comes to them, etc., that's a true vision. But not necessarily what the Prophet ﷺ says is not necessarily preserved. Because the Prophet, peace be upon him, told us, whoever sees me, man ra'ani, in the dream, then they have really seen me. Satan will not take the form of myself, my likeness. But the Prophet ﷺ did not say what I say in the dream is really me. So the vision is protected, not the speech. Which is why, and many, many people throughout Islamic history have gone astray because of this. They'll say, oh, the Prophet came to me and he told me to do this and he told me to do that. And then we can say, no, that's not true. You saw him, okay, that's fine, but you can't act on that. That doesn't equal legislation. There's no Sharia after the Sharia that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. Like this guy, Juhayman, the guy that invaded Mecca in the late 70s. It all started with all these visions. They had visions, and they acted on these visions. But we can't do that. We can't act on that vision. If the Prophet ﷺ comes and tells you to do something, if it's morally, okay, then that's fine, and that's something personal. But if the Prophet ﷺ comes to you and tells you something in the dream that's wrong, you can't act on that. Anyway, so the Prophet's dream is different because this is like a form of revelation. So he had this idea that he wants to take a defensive posture. His opinion was, let us stay in Medina, and we will be able to fight when they invade from the top of our houses. So we will have that advantage of height, and we will be able to repel them that way. We can hide. It's our city. They don't know us. We know them, so we can easily attack them. The Prophet ﷺ put together, for lack of a better word, a war cabinet. And here they are discussing what are they going to do, because now the Quraysh are Uhud. They have to do something. The Prophet ﷺ explained to them his interpretation of his vision. I have a vision. Some of you will die. Somebody from my family will die. It's better for us to stay. But there were many people in this meeting that did not participate in Badr, and they felt like they missed out on the battle of Badr. So they know we need to go out. We want to go out. We're going to meet them. We're going to beat them just like we beat them in the battle of Badr, etc. So the Prophet ﷺ gave in to their opinion. He said, okay, we'll follow your opinion. The Prophet ﷺ went away for a little bit and he put on his armor and he came out. Abu Bakr helped him get ready for war. And he put on 2 pieces of armor. And that little detail, that's also important for us to remember, because there is a moral lesson in that for us, which is that the Prophet ﷺ took all of the worldly means necessary to accomplish his tasks. He knew that he was protected, he knew that he would be given victory, all of these things, but he didn't just leave it. He acted on that. So when we read in the Seerah that he put on 2 pieces of armor, he had 2 shields, 2 pieces of armor, that means that what that means for us is he took all precautions, all preparations necessary, humanly possible. And then the rest you rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the way that we act is we do what we need to do to the best of our ability, and then we say at the end, inshallah, ya Rab, it goes well. You have to study for the exam and then go to the exam and say, Ya Allah. Don't, go to the exam and just open up the Quran to Surah Yasin, and people do that, and then inshallah, it's going to be fine. And you haven't studied. It's not going to work all the time. Anyway, so he comes out, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the Sahaba see him, and then they start to feel bad. They feel like they pushed him to fight. So they said, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe we should stay. We'll defer to you. That's okay. We change our minds. And the Prophet ﷺ said, a prophet cannot put on his war gear and then take it off until the battle is fought. and the decision is made. وَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. If you make a decision, then you put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you go forward. It's not a game. He's not going to be, oh, I was just kidding, take it off. No, this is serious. This is life, literally life and death. The enemy is at the gates. Maybe half day's march from Medina, and it's the issue is serious. The Prophet ﷺ prayed Jummah prayer in Medina, and he advised the companions and is encouraging them to be brave in battle, etc. And then they set out to meet the enemy. The army that the Prophet ﷺ put together in Medina was 1,000 strong, so more than the Battle of Badr. And there were 3 units. There were the Aus and the Khazraj and the Muhajirun. So the 2 main tribes of the Medina Muslims and the Muhajirun. And it's interesting that in this battle, because it was very close to Medina, many of the young people wanted to participate. And some of them, when the Prophet, when they would stand in a soldier line, some of the young people would stand on their toes so that they would look taller. So that when the Prophet ﷺ walked by them, he would think, that's what they were thinking, that they look older, and he would let them fight. And there are so many of these stories. It was very hard for me just to mention all of the names, but it got me thinking how this is the opposite of what we have today of people trying to dodge the army, or to dodge service, or to dodge the draft, as we heard growing up. This was the exact opposite. They were trying to break the rules to get into the army, to fight, because they didn't want to be left out. Be like, look, I'm better at fighting than he is, even though he's older. They would argue with the Prophet ﷺ. I can do it better. They were ready to give everything that they had for this cause, because this was their home, this was their faith, this was their family, this was an invasion of their homeland. The Quraysh has not looked, since we've gotten to Medina, there's been one military activity after another, almost on a monthly basis. So they really believed in the cause. And this was something that they shared, that they all shared in this spirit, that they wanted to protect themselves. Some of them were let in, some of them were not, but some of these tactics did work, that the Prophet ﷺ allowed them. They started marching north, and then they came upon, or they were met by a group of armed Jewish Medanese citizens, or co-patriots. So the Prophet ﷺ asked, "Aslamu, have they become Muslim?" And they said no. So he says, "I have no need for them." And he continues. And I want to pause on this, because these are the type of things that people take out of the seerah, and they're like, oh, look what Islam says, or look what the Prophet did, things like that. Don't forget what we talked about last week about Banu Qaynuqa and the problems that happened inside Medina. When the Prophet ﷺ is saying this, he's talking about political allegiance. He's not talking about faith. And the proof is, in this battle of Uhud, there was one Jewish man named Mukhayraq. And Mukhayraq told the Prophet he's leaving, we said, after Jummah. Friday, when the sun sets, that's the beginning of the Sabbath. So Mukhayraq, he receives this news that the Prophet's going, now they're finding out what's happening. So he tells his tribe, his Jewish friends and family, we have to go fight. Don't we owe this? Didn't we sign this constitution? We have to go fight and pray. And no one would go and fight. They said, oh, it's the Sabbath, we can't leave on the Sabbath. So Mukhayraq, all by himself, he put on his armor, he went and he fought, and he died in the Battle of Uhud. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Mukhayraq khayrul Yahud. Mukhayraq is the best of the Jews. So don't let these doubts slip in. You have to put all of this stuff together to make sense of what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. When he says about this group, are they Muslim? Meaning, are they with us the way that we agreed when we entered Medina, or are they against us like what was happening with Banu Qaynuqa? So when their allegiance to the state, when their allegiance to the battle, to the cause was in question, he said, I have no use for you. I can't go to battle and have a group, this was, how many did I say? 300. I can't have basically a third of the army, people that I don't know, or can't trust, or can flip, etc. And this happened, as we will see with other people. As they were marching, they came upon a blind man who was from the hypocrites. And the blind man was throwing dirt in the face of the Muslims and saying, if your Muslims don't pass, and cursing them, etc. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, leave him. He is blind in vision and in heart. So he doesn't know. The man doesn't know what's really going on. The Prophet ﷺ just ignore him. Okay, just pass him by. They arrive to the plain where they will, where the battle will eventually take place. However, behind the Muslim army, there is a little hill and a little valley, or a little alley rather, between the mountain, in which somebody can come from behind the Muslim army and attack. So the Prophet ﷺ, he took 50 archers and he put them on top of the hill. And the name, now I lost the name, I lost my place in my own notes. It's embarrassing. Oh yeah, Abdullah ibn Jubayr radiallahu anhu. Abdullah ibn Jubayr was the head of these 50. The Prophet ﷺ put them on the mountain / hill, and he said, you stay here, don't move no matter what. Even if we lose, don't leave the hill. Even if we win, don't leave the hill. Just stay on this place no matter what until I tell you to leave. Again, very explicit rules, because it's a flank. Somebody can come from behind them and then come and penetrate the back, which we know is what ends up happening. We'll get to that perhaps next week. So their job was to prevent a cavalry attack from this access point that's slightly back to the left of where the Muslim armies are. The rest of the army was in threes. There was a center unit, a right unit, and a left unit, which was typical for the Prophet ﷺ. It was a good battle formation because their backs were covered by the mountain, and they had on the hilltop the archers, which is like artillery fire. So that's pretty, those if you're back at the right angle and you launch the arrow, that can go quite far. So that can cover the Muslims. The bottom line is that the formation was sound. They had a good formation for this time. And I'm not, Mr. Military Strategy man, but you know what I'm saying. They had a good setup. And then the Prophet ﷺ, he starts to take the role of the commander-in-chief. And he starts to encourage the army. This is, when we say it's game day, like this is game day, but it's not a game. This is life, literally life or death. So the Prophet ﷺ, this is the pep talk. So he takes out a sword. He takes out his sword, and he said, who will take this sword by its right? If the Prophet said that, everyone's going to want it, right? So Abu Dujana, the famous Sahabi, he takes it. Abu Dujana was a showman. He's like the Rambo, basically, of the Ansar. He had a red bandana that he would wear when he would fight. And that was his way of saying, I'm all in. I'm in it until I die. Like, I'm going to go all the way until I can't go anymore. So he takes the sword from the Prophet ﷺ, and then he said, what is the right of this sword? And the Prophet ﷺ is that you fight with this sword, you fight the enemy until it bends. Meaning you fight until this sword is no more. Not until the enemy is done. I mean, the sword itself is gone. So he takes it and he starts like dancing on the horse. He starts like doing this, when people score like a touchdown and they do a dance, like he's all into it. And the Prophet ﷺ said, this is a act that if it was done in other than this place, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not like it. Again, teaching us that not everything is valid at the same time, in the same place, at the same circumstance. This is the time where you need to do that. This is the time where you need to rally the troops. This is the time where you need to remind them of what's at stake. This is the time where you need to remind them of victory. If you go into battle, if you go into a game, if you go into a test, even thinking of losing, like 1%, you open yourself up to lose. You have to go in thinking there's nothing, there's no other option but to win. Like when the famous general Tarek bin Ziyad crosses over to the Strait of Gibraltar. The Jabal Tarek, Gibraltar is named after him. Right? He burned the boats. And he turned to his troops and he said, the sea is behind us and the enemy is in front of us. Where are you going to go? I mean, he literally made no option. There is no other option. We're going to go or we're going to die. Those are the only two options we have. So this is what was happening. You have to understand that this is what was happening at this time, because what's behind the Muslims? The home. Their women and their children and their things and their livestock and the economy and their grandchildren. That's what's behind them. If they lose, then that's it. If you fall, then your family is going to die. That's what's happening psychologically to them. Right before the battle, Quraysh, they tried this tactic of trying to split the ranks of the Muslim army. So they send a message to the Ansar, and they say, look, this is really a fight between us and our countryman, Muhammad ﷺ, because the Prophet ﷺ is from Mecca. So they say, we don't want to fight you, we just want to fight the Prophet ﷺ and the rest of the people from Mecca. So why don't you, if you leave, we won't harm you. Right, and then the Ansar, of course, their response is even, they're doubling down, and their allegiance is now to the Prophet ﷺ. They have no more allegiance. Their allegiance is to something greater. But one hypocrite deserted the army from the people of Medina, and he was a Medinese Arab, and he deserted the army in a public way, and he walks out in front of the Muslim lines. And he says, "Oh, do you know who I am? I'm so," and then they're like, "Yeah, we know you. You're the fasiq." They start like cursing him and things like that. He's like trying to mess with them psychologically. And he goes and he joins the Quraysh, and he dies. I mean, eventually he dies in battle. By his own people killed him. But he deserted right before the battle. So this tactic that the Quraysh had didn't work. It had the reverse effect, because now the Prophet ﷺ and the rest of his people can see who's really with them and who's not with them. Also, the women that the Quraysh brought, they were also encouraging their troops. They were also, lines of poetry, cursing the Muslims, cursing the Prophet ﷺ, encouraging their people to fight. This is a pretty intense battle. I mean, when you read this, that's really, really intense. If you try to close your eyes and live in what was happening, it's a very intense, very, very intense situation. And then the battle begins. The battle begins in the traditional way with the dueling. And Zubayr, radiallahu anhu, he beats Talha ibn Abi Talha, who was a feared Meccan. And Talha ibn Abi Talha, he carried the flag for the Quraysh on this day, on this battle. And the flag was a very important thing at this time. If the flag fell, it's like a sign that you're going to lose. So if you see, I mean, even now, if the flag falls, somebody runs and carries it. Because then you show people, it's a physical, visual sign to the troops that were still in it. Just like if the general, fell off his horse or something like that, then he's gone. Then you start to panic. So the flag is a very important situation. So Zubayr kills Talha ibn Abi Talha. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says, every prophet has a disciple, and my disciple is Zubayr. After this incident, the word that he uses, Hawari, and this is the reason I translate it as disciple, is that this is the same word Allah Ta'ala refers to in the Quran when Christ, إِذْ قَالَ عِيسَى لِلْحَوَارِيُّونَ, if Christ said to his disciples, مَنْ أَنصَارِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, who will be my victors with Allah? قَالَ الْحَوَارِيُّونَ نَحْنُ أَنصَارُ, the disciples said, we will be your support and victors for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, all of the companions were his disciples, but this is the word that the Prophet ﷺ used. After Talha dropped the flag, it was carried by 5 other members of his own family. All of them died in Badr, one after another. So that's 6 people that carried the flag, and it fell. And then a 7th person took the flag. He was a slave from Quraysh. He fell, and the flag was lost. So that's pretty, for the Quraysh side, that's pretty bad. It's a very bad omen. The flag can't stand. They keep getting killed. These are the feared warriors of Quraysh that are falling like flies. So very quickly, the morale of the Quraysh dissipates. Before we get to that, what's the most important thing for us to remember in this early part of the battle is the martyrdom of Sayyidina Hamza, radiallahu anhu. So this was the vision of the Prophet ﷺ. And Hamza was, as we know from when we talked about him in the Meccan period, He was a pretty serious guy, very feared fighter. He is referred to as the lion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the lion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Asadullah. I mean, that's a big statement to say that. So Wahshay is the Abyssinian slave whose slave owner told him, with the encouragement of the wife of Abu Sufyan, Hind, if you kill Hamza, we will free you. Because they're trying to look for like a psychological victory. They don't want to just beat the army, that they want to pick off certain people on purpose so that it means something to the Muslims. Which is why in every battle, even in this battle, there's always this misinformation. Oh, the Prophet ﷺ has been killed. And we'll see that next week when we talk about that. The Quraysh always try to send that, oh, Muhammad is dead, and then sort of to confuse the Muslims. But we know the Prophet ﷺ didn't die in battle. Wahshay kills Hamza radiallahu anhu, and this is an extreme, very huge blow to the Prophet ﷺ. Because not only was Hamza his uncle, but remember Hamza was his brother from wet nurse. So he had a very close relationship with him. And he was one of his main supporters, one of the main supporters of the Prophet ﷺ. I wanted to just have a little tangent in the story of Wahshay, because I think there are a lot of lessons for us. Wahshay is freed, and he goes back to Mecca, and after the conquest of Mecca, he's trying to dodge the Prophet ﷺ. He's trying to dodge the Muslims. He goes to Ta'if for a little bit, he goes here, he goes there, and then he realizes, he can't hide. Everyone is becoming Muslim. So somebody tells him, look, if you become Muslim, you're going to be safe. The Prophet ﷺ doesn't kill his own people. Right? This was his reputation, that he didn't kill his own people. So Wahshay comes to Medina. And when he enters, the Sahaba, this is later in the Sirah, the Sahaba, they're all excited and they're telling the Prophet, this is Wahshay, this is the person that killed Hamza. And he said, let him come. Islam is more important than that. So he comes and he gives his shahada, and then he tells Wahshay, tell me how you killed my uncle. So he narrates the story, which is how we have the story in the Sirah of Ibn Hisham, etc. Wahshay himself is narrating this story. And the Prophet ﷺ is so overcome with emotion, he says, غِبَ عَنِّي. I don't want to see you. You can be Muslim, you're safe, but I can't see you. So Wahshay said, I did everything possible that I would not be seen by the Prophet ﷺ. Even though he fought, he was a soldier in the army of Islam for the longest time. What ends up happening to Wahshay is during the fitna with Musaylama al-Kadhdhab, Musaylama who claimed that he was a prophet, it was Wahshay who killed Musaylama with the same spear that he used to kill Hamza. There was some confusion because 3 people attacked Musaylama, including Wahshay. So he said, if I'm the one that really killed him, then this spear killed the best of creation after the Prophet ﷺ, and then it killed the worst of creation, which was Musaylama. But Wahshay, he develops a drinking problem. He ends up in Syria, in Damascus. He has a drinking problem, and because he's a drunkard, he's kicked out of the army. And he dies that way. He dies, as a drunkard. And when this news came back to Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, Umar said, this is what I would assume would happen with the person that killed Hamza. That's a very important lesson for us, because we don't read that there was some commission that came out of Medina to go beat Wahshay because he was a drunkard. I'm not saying that drinking is halal. We know drinking is haram, it's from the kaba'ir. But he was left because he was a broken man. I mean, if you do something like that, if you kill somebody innocent like Hamza, Asadullah radiallahu anhu alayhi salam, it's going to have a lasting moral impact in your life. That's what Sayyidina Umar was saying. He's still a Sahabi, right? He's still a companion. He became Muslim, he fought with the Islam, he did his duty, but he was a weak person. And that's what's important for us to remember. Some people are weak, and our job is to help, our job is to counsel, our job is to be there. Our job is not to beat people, or harm them because of their sins, because there is none of us that is without sin. None of us is without sin. So that's the tangent of Hamza and Wahshay. Back to the battle, just to wrap things up. there was a lot of intense fighting. A lot of heroes died in the Battle of Uhud. And the same Barzanji that I mentioned last week also wrote a poem of all of the shuhada of the Battle of Uhud that we recite yearly. Despite all of this, the Muslims had the upper hand. The issue of the flag being lost was a bad omen for the Quraysh. And when they saw that over 10 people tried to carry the flag and were killed, they started their retreat. And they started slowly to leave. And that's where we know everything starts to change for the Battle of Uhud. And we'll talk about the story of the archers next week, inshallah. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Any questions or concerns, comments? Items, sir.
Can I ask a couple of questions regarding today's khutbah or some questions from the previous halakha?
Yes.
Maybe some others have started with today's halakha. I will go first.
Go ahead, that's fine.
So today, during khutbah, you mentioned about Miraj and about the commands from the God, about the 5-time prayers. And in that, you told that in 5-time prayers, some prayers were silent prayers. For example, Zuhr, Asr, or 1 Rakata, Maghrib. So, how come this kind of the commands came, the order came from Allah that all the 5 prayers are obligatory? How come this came that these prayers, these 3-time prayers are silent? And what we have to recite, we, not Imam. What Imam is reciting in those prayers, what we have to recite.
So why are some prayers silent and some prayers out loud? I don't know. That's how it is. Dhuhr and Asr are silent, and then Maghrib, Isha, and Fajr are loud.
What we have to recite? When do people?
What do we recite? So, but that's the first question of why are some of them silent and why are some of them out loud? Allahu A'lam. I really don't know. I mean, we can try to think of some like esoteric hikmah, but I don't know. That's just how they are. But when you pray, if you're praying in Jama'ah, then you just need to recite the Fatiha behind the Imam, silently. That's the minimum.
What about surah? We don't recite.
You can recite a surah if you have time. Any surah. It could be a verse, it could be 2 verses, it could be a short surah. Yeah.
So in previous last khutbah, last halakha, you mentioned about our Prophet's turban. It was wearing the long turban.
Yes.
What about the color of that turban?
The color of the Prophet's turban, he had a white turban. He also had a black turban. When the Prophet entered Mecca, he was wearing a black turban, which is why this Bozo al-Baghdadi wore the black turban when he gave that khutbah, right, to show that he is like the Khalifa.
And we were doing it was green.
Green? Maybe, I don't know.
The last one question is about Aisha radiallahu anha. You once in one of the khutbahs, these halakas, you told that she was married to our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at the age of 6. Then we used to have a lesson since last when I was born, I was 6, 7, that she was 9 when she was married to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
There is a difference when the Prophet ﷺ married the kitab and when the dukhla, when the consummation took place. So the Prophet ﷺ married her in Mecca before the hijrah, but she didn't come and live with the Prophet ﷺ until after in Medina when she was 9.
You mean nikah or some engagement?
Yes.
At the age of 6, and then this, I don't know, but you told 6 at the age of 6 she was married.
Yes, just the kitab at 6, and then she moved into the house of the Prophet ﷺ when she was 9.
So do we have any idea how this idea came to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to marry? We have we heard about that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam married many ladies, but how come this idea came to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to marry Aisha?
Again, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but there was hikmah in the Prophet ﷺ marrying Sayyidah Aisha because Sayyidah Aisha grew up in the house of the Prophet.
She became the mufti, then she learned.
She was a mufti of Medina. You know, a lot of our Sharia comes from Sayyidah Aisha. She was a motherly figure for the companions because she lives past, of course, the Prophet ﷺ for many years. She was present during many of the fitnas. I also mentioned how there are other attempts to interpret her early marriage because some people, they you know.
Yeah. Most of this young generation, they ask this question, 6 years old or 9 years old.
Yeah, so just for the young people, just say she was a teenager. Because like it doesn't make a difference. These issues are not going to change Islam. They're not going to change her role. Nothing is going to change. I mean, even if they stop asking about this, people will ask about something else. So the issue is not the age, right? Child marriage in Islam is haram by consensus of the Ummah, if that's what people are concerned about. And in most Muslim countries, it's legislated. Defended by the Sharia, not despite of the Sharia. By the Sharia, it's defended that it's haram. So if that's the issue, no, that's haram. That's completely haram. Was Sayyidah Aisha alayhi salam being 9 the same as my daughter is 10, 9, 10? No, Sayyidah Aisha was not like that. Their physiology was very different in the pre-modern world, things like that. But there are other ulama who have tried to explain that this really means that she was in her teenage years, and if people want to believe in that, that's fine. For me personally, it's not an issue. But I do respect that some people that is an issue. Why did the Prophet ﷺ marry Sayyidah Aisha? Allahu A'lam. But it was a way of, we know that there's a great hikmah in it.
Thank you.
Can I say something about that?
Just 1 second, go ahead.
Okay. Actually, you told about Abdullah ibn Zubair, the archer head in Uhud.
Yes.
Is he the son of Asma radiallahu anha? Because Asma's husband Zubair, his son is also
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, Abdullah.
No, this is Abdullah bin Jubair,
Yeah.
not Zubair.
No, Abdullah ibn Zubair, but
The head of the archers was Abdullah ibn Jubair,
Zubair.
another one.
He's the son of Asma, or
I don't know. Yeah.
So, from what is marriage? From an anthropological point of view, the place of marriage in different cultures worldwide has been different. Nowadays, we interpret marriage as a sexual relationship between man and woman. But the function of marriage can mean something, so many things. I'm at this moment not entirely prepared to elaborate extensively about it because I have to go back to the material. But marriage is sometimes the consolidation of family relations, wealth relations, and so on and so on. So it is more than an intimate relationship. So when people relate to the Prophet and sometimes they move in the direction of fili and so on, it is far more than that. It is a narrow ethnocentric point of view to point the finger only to child marriage. It is more than that.
Sure. Yeah.
Oftentimes when there are these type of very controversial subjects like this, I don't know, for me it's just my opinion that this is how you are being tested, whether this religion are you sincere to it? Because similar to the change of the Qibla, it was just a directional change. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it was to determine who is sincere. And I can imagine there are many Muslims who have left Islam because of this particular thing. They couldn't wrap their head around it. From our standpoint, that it is the Prophet of Allah. So we accept it, and that's it, we move on. This is, to me, it's just a test of my sincerity to Islam. It's not a big issue at all to me.
Sure. If these controversial issues not being a big issue for you, I have to repeat the question because the number one complaint I get is I don't repeat the questions. So I'm trying your response that it's not a big deal for you, we just accept it, etc. That is one type of response. But there are other people that we have to understand that can't respond that way. They just can't see beyond it. They can't, once you say something like that, it doesn't matter what you're going to say after that, they're going to stop and they're going to critique and ask and critique and ask and critique and ask until they understand. And we believe part of the way our faith is put together is there is nothing that we don't have an answer to. Now, I might not know the answer, and if I don't, I'll just say I don't know. I'll tell you next week. I'll look it up, etc. And that's, I'm upfront about that. But there is an answer, or there is an explanation, or there's a way to understand it. And when we arrive at that, sometimes there are many lessons that we benefit. On an individual level, yes, like you said, and many of these early controversial issues, like Imam Malik, when he was asked about what does it mean that God descends on the throne, ala al-arsh istawa. So he said, we believe in it as it's stated and don't ask about it because asking about it is bid'ah, belief in it is, wajib, and he's same kind of attitude. That's fine for me. I don't need to imagine. But what if somebody comes to me and that's like between them and disbelief is this issue? So I need to try to explain, and maybe I didn't think about it. Maybe somebody comes to me and because I've just accepted it, they come and be like, you know what, you have a good point. I don't know. Let me understand. Let me investigate. Let me look at this. The problem with the marriage of Sayyidah Aisha is we don't have another narration. There's not another narration that says, oh, I was 18. I was 9, and it's her that's saying it, not somebody else. So some people, they say, she was trying to be playful in indicating how young she was when she married the Prophet. She was showing that she was really young. I was 9, like that. But she was really, probably a teenager. I was so young when the Prophet married. I was like 9. See, when we read the print, we don't read it in that inflection. Another controversial thing, when the Prophet ﷺ tells women, oh, you are deficient in intellect and religion. Right? And people say, oh, look, Islam mistreats women and stuff like that. But how many times has your wife come to you and be like, woman, you're crazy? When she says something funny, but you're saying she's not offended, you're being playful. Woman, you're crazy. Or somebody tells you, are you crazy? But we don't read that hadith that way. When people criticize it, they only read it as if it's like a declarative statement. Oh, all women, you are dumb and you have no deen. But that's not what the Prophet ﷺ was saying. Because he said, خَيْرُكُمْ خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ. The best of you are the best to your women. وَأَنَا خَيْرُكُمْ لِأَهْلِ. And I am the best to my family and to my women. رِفْقًا بِالْقَوَارِيرِ. Be gentle with the fragile, meaning women. That's what he said generally. So a lot of times, why did I even think of this? Because somebody has asked me this question. So it got me thinking about this hadith. So I respect that you don't need an answer. That makes my job easier. Alhamdulillah. But I also respect that there are a lot of people, especially today, where they're getting information from different sources. And there's a lot of confusion, so we have to do our best to answer them. Yes?
So a question from a couple of halakas
Yeah.
before. You had mentioned, I'm not questioning the thing, but that during Ramadan, it's been said that you can, if you use a Q-tip, you can actually be breaking the fast. But my question isn't about that, it's about the process. When that came out, was there dissent? Was there discussion? How was that made? What is it?
No, the issue of the Q-tip and fasting is that fasting is defined in the Sharia as not allowing anything to enter an orifice. The ear being an orifice. Usually we think about it as food and drink, is because 99% of the time that's what we're doing. But technically speaking, and I said this to emphasize a point, not that it's like a legal debate, that if the Q-tip went too far, because there's a difference in the Sharia between the outer ear and the inner ear. So if the Q-tip went too far, which would probably be uncomfortable naturally anyway, then technically a foreign object has entered into the body cavity, into an orifice, and then you would have lost your wudu. So I just say that to emphasize a legal point, not that,
But so nobody questioned that? There was no discussion about it? It was just accepted? That's
it's a modern thing. It's not like a controversial issue. I'm just emphasizing a point. And I think Q-tips are bad. Aren't they bad for you?
yeah.
Okay, so there you go.
I have a comment on the Q-tips.
Oh God, okay.
FDA doesn't approve it.
What?
FDA does not approve Q-tips.
The FDA does not approve. Okay, but we don't take our deen from the FDA, but sure. Anything that's going to help support my opinion, I'm please bring me more. Yes?
It is considered as a device, actually.
A device, okay, interesting.
Quick question about salat. As mentioned, loud salahs and silent salahs. So what is the ruling about when you miss, when you come into a jama'ah and it's a loud salah and you miss a couple of rakats, like the front end, are you, when you make them up, do you make them out loud?
Okay, so you join a prayer that's out loud,
Correct.
and you join it late, so you have to stand up and finish the prayer. What do? Don't be the guy that's in the back belting out the Quran when everyone, that's what you don't want to do. Because what is out loud, the definition of out loud is enough that you can hear it. That's it. Don't be belting. It's not like, audition. But people do that.
There's a distinction between Asr and Maghrib or Isha. When you say it.
From that point of view, there would be no distinction when you are praying by yourself, Dhuhr, Asr, or Maghrib and Isha, because even when you pray Dhuhr and Asr, you want it to be audible enough that you are sounding the words. Like you can't just stay there with your mouth closed and reciting the Fatiha in your head, because that's not recitation. You have to say it. So some sound would come out, but only enough that you can hear it. So it's the same thing from that point of view. Remember, prayer is a very serene act. People that come in the mosque and start belting out, that's not the way we should be doing it. Actually, in some madhabs, if you come into a mosque that has a regular imam and you miss the prayer, you're not allowed to form another jama'ah. You have to pray by yourself. Like in the Maliki school, if we had a regular imam here being the person that leads the 5 prayers, and you missed Dhuhr and you came in, we're like a group of us, and we came in, we would have to pray separately. Because there's a ratib, there's a paid imam that's his job. So you're like in his turf, you can't do that. But also one of the things is that in other schools of thought that's not the case, but what ends up happening is that there are all of these jama'ats that are formed, and then there's all of this noise in the mosque, and the prayer has been missed. So also we have to do things with a little bit of finesse. Yeah.
I just have a question on your thoughts on the revisionism by some scholars on Sayyidah Aisha's alayhi's age. My problem with many of these people who do revisionism is, there is a chain in Bukhari that does mention her age is 9, and I feel like the reason that many of these people are, with all due respect to them, they're doing it is because they're imposing modern standards of morality and trying to backtrack it into 8th century or 7th century Arabia. And if just a basic reading of anthropology will tell you that age that Sayyidah Aisha got married is not even a huge deal. The Roman Empire during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the average age people got married was 12 years old. Even in colonial America, 300 years ago, one of the first divorce cases was an 11-year-old girl in Massachusetts. So I understand why some of those scholars and lay people might want to, change that age because it is uncomfortable to explain.
No, I don't believe in revisionism at all. I think that's sinful. Our job is to verify our texts which have been verified and use them and interpret them. So I can't revise something that's been verified.
Right.
That hadith that she was 9 when she got married is verified. She's the one saying it. It's not somebody else. And that's the only hadith we have on that topic. So there's no point of trying to change what the hadith. But what does that mean? Like the things that you mentioned, anthropologically it's different. Romeo and Juliet were 13, 14 years old. The Roman Empire, what was normal about that? That helps me understand the context. I think that's important, because that's the job of a scholar, is to help people understand. So that's not revising, that's explaining. Or some of these hadith that I mentioned just a little while ago, and reciting them with different inflections. I don't see that as revision. I see that as, why don't you think about it as the Prophet saying it this way, rather than in this one negative way. But I'm not negating what he said.
Yeah, exactly. But this line of attack that Islamophobes use, Islamophobes have existed since the beginning of Islam. And
Sure.
this point about Sayyidah Aisha's age, this didn't come up until Oriental studies in the 1900s. Even Voltaire wrote a play about the Prophet ﷺ, insulting the Prophet ﷺ. And he didn't make fun of the marriage with Aisha. He made fun of the marriage with Zainab. So, you know, this issue of the attack of her age, I don't
Yeah,
know
if-
if that's really a big deal. You know?
Well, again, like I was telling Dr. Khan, if it's not a big deal for you, that's awesome. But there are people in which it is a big deal for. So I have to also, I don't know who's going to listen to this or who's watching or what's in, people don't want to talk and they feel embarrassed. I also have to acknowledge that it is a problem for some people. That's all I'm saying. It's not a problem for me. I agree with you. It's not a problem at all. There are other things that I find problematic that I'm struggling with. This is not an issue. So it is a result of modern, Orientalism, etc. I agree, but there are other things that will come down the line that our children and our grandchildren will have to deal with. So in discussing this also equips us with a capacity to be able to deal with some of the difficulties that we find in our history, in our sources. That's all I'm saying. Not to change it.
Yeah.
What I believe is no place of any one of us to change a hadith or a Quran that's been verified. But inflection is a very big part. When the Prophet ﷺ spoke, how did he say what he said?
Yeah.
We don't think about that when we read the hadith. We just read it.
Yeah,
And
like-
whatever you
like
bring,
the nature of his speech.
yeah, in his inflection, his stress, how he emphasized certain words. Sometimes he was playful, like when he told the old lady, "Did you know that no old people are going to paradise?"
Yeah.
And she was going to cry. He's like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, when everyone gets to Jannah, they're all going to be young." So he was being playful. So he wasn't trying to hurt her. He was being playful. He was like joking, in his own way. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So the way he says it, that's very important. It can't be just you read it and then it means exactly what I want it to mean. You have to start to think about these things. And when you have something that's difficult, you have to put it against the other things that we know that's not difficult to make sense of it, etc. Yeah.
Can I ask about Uhud? So, do we know anything about the Prophet ﷺ's interaction with Hind following Uhud?
Well, Hind becomes Muslim, but Hind desecrates Hamza's body and eats part of his liver, and that's pretty. And his nose cuts his nose off and ears off. I mean, she was pretty bad. But she didn't kill him, the way that Wahshay did. And the of Hind, when she comes to the Prophet ﷺ and she says, Abu Sufyan is a stingy man. What should I do? He said, take what you need, and that's okay. So there's interaction between the Prophet ﷺ and Hind. So, I don't think he was happy about it, let's say that, but it wasn't like Wahshay, because Wahshay is the one that killed, and he had no stake in the game. He only did this so he would be free. He didn't believe in any of this stuff. He was just sort of, oh, okay, I'll do it. He's good at the spear, and so I think that's why the Prophet ﷺ, that was like a big deal. But Hind, I believe they interacted after that. But that Islam comes later, like towards the end also, after the Fatah.
Why is it that Ali who carried the best of Quraysh are not included in the list of women of highest status in Islam, like
Amina is not in the ranks of the women in Islam because she didn't live in the time of Islam. That's it. She died when the Prophet ﷺ was still a boy. So what we would say, she died at the time of Jahiliyyah. She was a good person. She wasn't a polytheist. She believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. She saved, Yawm al-Qiyamah. She's the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, all of these things, but she did not live in Islam the way that Sayyidah Khadija lived in Islam, or the way that Aisha lived in Islam. That's why. That's it. Or Maryam, the mother of Isa, was before even Islam. Yeah. And some of the ulama say that Mary was a prophet, because she received some kind of revelation or communication from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of how she should give birth to Christ. وَهُزِّي إِلَيْكِ بِجِذِعِ النَّخْلِ تُسَاقِطْ بِهِ رَطَبًا شَهِيًّا. Shake the tree, and then you'll get the dates, the fresh dates will fall. So she's receiving revelation. Also the mother of Moses. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى أُمِّ مُوسَى. And we have given revelation to the mother of Moses. So some of the ulama, they say that this means that these were prophets. Not the majority opinion, but there are some opinions that say that. Anything else? Or- Yeah.
You said today a couple of things, very powerful things on cosmology.
During the Uhud discussion?
During the
Oh, okay.
And I think it's very important to relate to the Islamic sources of knowledge because it's provided inspirations of people who are doing research and so on. And the Quran is compared to other religious books, the Bible and the Torah and so on, they have to be revised so many times because there are simple things therein which were written in it which were not sustainable. So if you look at the history of the Bible, you see that there have been so many revisions of the Bible. But in the Quran, we don't have this. And every time scholars they relate to statements within the Quran which are simply perplexing. For instance, there is one line in the Quran which is saying that the universe is expanding with an incredible speed. And it is only in the 20th century that people were baffled to see that the universe is indeed expanding with incredible speed, and they could not explain it. And they lead to the issues of black matter, an unseenable quantity, and so on and so on. So the Quran is different. And when you relate it also, you mentioned also when we are facing an astrophysics, we accept their authority and we are simply silent. But the kind of profound things, and you did that a couple of times, you relate to the cosmology of Islam, which is so enormously powerful, and I hope you will do that more.
Okay, we'll talk about cosmology more when the time is right, inshallah. It's really something else, when you think about how insignificant, we know of no other planet that has life except our planet. Maybe there is, but I mean not like this. Even if there's one more or two more, I mean it's still minuscule compared to how big the observable universe is right now. But to think that the entire observable universe is the size of a ring thrown in a desert in comparison to the second level of the heavens, and so on and so forth, to the throne of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that shows us how very small we are. And how great Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. That what He has created in the created world is more, exponentially more than what we will ever observe during our lifetime. That what we are observing in our lifetime is only a minuscule portion of Allah's greatness and creation. So, that's pretty powerful. It's pretty powerful. The Quran also speaks about the relativity of time. That one day with Allah was X number of thousand, 1 year with Allah is X number of thousand years of the way we count. That's basically the relativity of time. Though that is the beginning principles of how time is a dimension that's bendable, that's relative, just like space, just like weight, color, etc. These all lead to profound discussions in Islamic theology and in Islamic metaphysics. But people, we don't read. أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا? Do they not reflect on the Quran, or are their hearts locked? So the organ by which we need to understand the Quran is our heart. It's not a rational exercise, but it's our heart. And that's what we have to bring to it. And alhamdulillah, we have the example of the Prophet ﷺ, because he taught us how to do that. So we are blessed in that way. We'll talk about cosmology, inshallah. Anybody else? Yes.
So, authenticity of Quran is not a question, but do you, on the Sahih Hadith, you were saying, is there any, if you doubt any part of Hadith, do you disown, become a non-Muslim, or?
No, if you deny some of the Hadith, you're not.
No, deny it. It's authenticity. You were saying that.
Yeah, if you deny the authenticity of some of the Hadith, that doesn't take you outside of Islam. If you deny the Hadith altogether, that takes you outside of Islam. But the science of authenticating the Hadith is a very complicated science. And each Imam, that wrote books of hadith like Al-Bukhari, Muslim, Dawood, Tirmidhi, they all have their own criteria by which they use to determine if the hadith is sound or not sound. And there has been no book, aside from the Quran, there has been no book that has been commented on, studied, analyzed more than Sahih Bukhari in the history of humanity. You can fill this whole mosque with just books commenting on just Sahih al-Bukhari. So that's a lot, you know. For people that criticize the hadith, they have to face that. That's the evidence, like that's the jury that they have to face. Is it possible that Imam al-Bukhari made a mistake? Yeah, sure, he's an Imam. But we've been at this for, 1,000 years now, and we're pretty confident that this book is Sahih. There's some hadith that the ulama said might be weak. Some of the Dar al-Qutni talked about that, and then Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani responded to that. But even still, there's only a few hadith. It's just a percentage of what's in the rest of the book. Are there hadith that are weak? Absolutely. Are there hadith that are forged, that are made up? Yes, and we know where they all are because we have them cataloged. So if people want to criticize the hadith, ahlan wa sahlan, but you have to learn that trade. You have to learn that vocabulary. You have to learn that science to be able to play in the big leagues. So it's okay to question, but as a normal, regular Muslim, my advice would be not to question the authenticity of the hadith, but to simply say, I don't understand this hadith. Or I don't understand this hadith vis-a-vis another principle that I learned. Or I don't understand this hadith vis-a-vis a verse in the Quran. That would be a better approach, because you're still leaving the door open that maybe there's something that I'm not seeing.
The hadith came long after Quran. So there was a mission that if you can doubt authenticity of hadith, how the system.
Are you a follower of Ghamdi? Okay.
I'm not a follower anyway.
Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. The hadith was written during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, just like the Quran, not after. So that's a misconception. Sahih al-Bukhari was not put together until Imam al-Bukhari. But Imam al-Bukhari didn't make this up out of thin air. He wasn't just, writing out of nothing, out of a vacuum. The hadith were compiled during the life of the Prophet ﷺ by different Sahaba. For example, the Musnad of Imam Ahmad, when it has the different collections, of Zayd, Abu Bakr, Uthman, Umar, these are the hadith that they narrated, that they wrote down. So that's a misconception. So therefore, this notion that the hadith was left until several hundred years after the Prophet ﷺ died or passed away, and therefore we should doubt it, because that's wrong. It was written during the life of the Prophet ﷺ, and there's a science in how we accept a narration or reject a narration. There are many forged hadith, there are many weak hadith, that's true. But what we have in the canon, the 6 main books, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Ibn Majah, and An-Nisa'i, those are pretty much not all of the Sahih, but the majority of the Sahih. When you dig into their commentaries, you'll see the different chains of transmission that have been accepted, rejected, discussed by the different ulama. So it's a really large thing.
You have expressed a sort of surprise at Hamdi's being followed Hamdi or something. What's your view about him?
I don't know much about Ghamidi, because I think most of what he says is in Urdu. There are some things that I've seen that have some English subtitles. So I don't want to, I don't like to talk about anybody. But when you hear certain, I just want to know who's in the audience. He's the first time I see this brother. Just want to make sure he's with us. I'm just giving him a hard time. So everyone is welcome. To be honest, I haven't seen a lot, but every time somebody mentions something by him or a concept, it reminds me that personality I have dealt with before. He's not saying anything that I haven't heard before. A lot of these things come from the type of evangelic efforts that happened in the early part of the 19th century in the Muslim world. And a lot of these arguments about Bukhari and about Muslim, about the Quran and the Isra and Ma'raj and the birth of Aish, all of these things, they wrote about these early evangelical, preachers. They wrote about these things in Arabic, Samuel Zwemer was a huge figure who was in India at a time, Bahrain, and then Egypt. And under his authority, there's a 4-volume book called Al-Hidayah, written in Arabic, and it's full of all of these misconceptions. And what's interesting is now, almost verbatim, these same misconceptions are coming again, but from Muslim people. So for me, I'm not hearing anything new. I've heard this, when we studied hadith, we learned about its history of compiling because people say this and people say that. So I'm not surprised. So, I'm more interested in the ideas, not the people, So I don't like to talk about people specifically. Unless it's somebody that I know.
I'm sorry, I don't time. Tonight is great.
Yalla. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam.